Yeah, he's your slave. Yes, legally speaking, culturally speaking, you can do whatever you want. But I'm telling you, he's family. Treat him like that. In fact, I want you to treat him like you would treat me. Which is, of course, a fancy, because he's one of us. For Philemon to do that would have been to literally, I can't stress enough. For Philemon to do that would have been to going not just against what the culture said, it would be to explode the entire concept of what his culture stands for. It's one thing to try to change the culture. We constantly are trying to do that. You know what's much harder than trying to change the culture? Just doing the right thing regardless of what the culture around you is doing. Paul is asking Philemon to do the right thing, even if the rest of the culture won't. Free Onesimus. Do not punish him. If he owes you money, I'll pay it back. Don't you worry. Now look, all we have is the letter. That's what we've got. We don't have a return letter. We don't have any of that. But I'll tell you this. If Philemon didn't do what Paul asked, I think the first thing he would have done would be to throw away the letter, not keep it forever, and put it in the Bible. Right? It seems reasonable that you wouldn't frame the thing that is your source of shame as you betray your friend Paul while he's in prison. Church history tells us that the rest of the story of Onesimus is this. Philemon frees him. Onesimus goes back, partners with Paul. Paul dies around 68 AD at the hands of Nero. Most of his companions also die, but there's a couple. One is Timothy, who we read about in our Bibles. Timothy is sent to a place called Ephesus to preach and teach. And church history tells us Onesimus goes with him. And when Timothy passes away, Onesimus takes over as the bishop of Ephesus. Onesimus, a man who was a slave, property, a man who was a thief, imprisoned, becomes the leader of the church in one of the most important ancient cities in the world. Because that's how the gospel works. And because Paul and Philemon said, I don't care what the culture says, we're going to do this instead. I love that story. I do. It's got some ugly background, but it's a beautiful example of what the kingdom of God looks like. Where, yeah, the culture around us does terrible things, but we don't have to. And I bring this up this morning because we're in our final week of our series called The Songs We Sing. And we finished with Stephanie's favorite song. How cute am I? Decided to do that for Stephanie. And we sang this morning, we began with Be Thou My Vision. Be Thou My Vision is written by a guy, I have to look at it, I'm never going to get it right. It's Dallin Forgale is the guy that wrote it, and he's Irish from the 6th century, and I promise you, he is in heaven right now, and he is so angry about the way that I just said his name. Because there's no way it's Dallin Forgale. There's no way. But we're going to go with it. Dallin Forgale is a 6th century poet. He ends up a martyr. He ends up a saint. All that stuff is great. And he writes, Be Thou My Vision. And here's what I love about Dallin Forgale. Okay? Be Thou My Vision and Be Thou My Vision. Be Thou My Vision and Dallin Forgale. Like this, it's just such a difficult song to sing. It's a hard song to understand. There's a lot going on in it that doesn't make any sense to me, it seems like. It gets pretty, but I don't know what half of it means. What I love about this song when you look into it, though, is Dallin Forgale is a blind man. Be Thou My Vision is literal. It's a literal song about, I don't have eyes, God be my eyes. We think it's this allegorical, metaphorical thing. It's literally just a blind guy writing a song about how God should be his eyes. I mean, that's pretty funny, as it turns out. But it also has a line in the song in verse 3 which we never sing, actually. That was the first time we sang that this morning, because it's weird. But there's this line that says, "Be thou my battle shield, my sword for the fight," right? And that is a very clear reference to a passage of Scripture that I'm going to read right now. It's in the book of Ephesians, chapter 6. This is what we read. It says, "Be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on all of God's armor so that you will be able to stand firm against all strategies of the devil. For we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. Therefore, put on every piece of God's armor so that you will be able to resist the enemy in time of evil. Then after the battle, you will still be standing firm." And it goes on, and there's a sword, and there's a shield, and for some reason there's a belt. I was always confused about the belt. Like, are you not going to keep your pants up without, like, what? It's weird to me. The belt always threw me in that passage. But there's the full armor of God, right? And I don't preach on the armor of God much because this is something we generally, this is like a children's church passage. Like, this is like a VBS thing. Like, this is kind of, it's all exciting and fun and all of that, and it's a neat passage, right? But it's all very theatrical, right? Paul is talking about how the devil and evil spirits exist. We don't see them, but we wage war with them, spiritual war. So we should put on God's armor to fight. I mean, again, it's a metaphor, but it's still it's just all very theatrical. Here's the thing about that passage. We relegate it to children's church and VBS and all of that because it's very easy to do. I remember one year I was at camp and we had a mannequin and we made our own armor of God, and it was ridiculous. I mean, this thing was ridiculous, and everybody loved it, and it was super fun because we had like a football helmet on and like a lightsaber and just all sorts of stuff. The thing about this passage, though, is the context of this passage is surprising. That's Ephesians 6, starting at verse 10. Let's rewind to the beginning of Ephesians 6 and see what we're talking about here. "Children, obey your parents, because you belong to the Lord, for this is the right thing to do. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise. If you honor your father and mother, things will go well for you, and you will have a long life on the earth. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger by the way you treat them. Rather, bring them up with the discipline and instruction that comes from the Lord." That doesn't sound very spiritual warfare in the unseen world. The next stuff is all about slaves and masters. By the way, that's why we started with Philemon. But we've talked enough about slavery, so we'll just assume that there too. We're talking about normal, everyday life. It does not get more normal everyday life than kids with their parents and parents with their kids. It just doesn't. The way you raise your kids and the way you kids react to your parents. That is the context for which we are talking about spiritual warfare with unseen demons and Satan and rulers and kingdoms and the armor of God with a fancy belt. That's what the context is. The context is not about ghost hunting. The context is not about, casting out demons with an exorcist, right? That's not what this is. What Paul is saying is, in your everyday life, what you do in the day-to-day, mundane, normal stuff, that is all spiritual warfare. That's all spiritual. See, we split things up from normal and spiritual. And what Paul is saying is, nope, it is all spiritual. The way you treat your neighbor, the way you treat your wife, the way you mother your children, the way you go to work, the way you, whatever it is, all of that is a reflection of your faith in God and your warfare you're doing with evil in this world. The way we solve evil is not through changing the culture, right? Paul and Philemon do not end slavery. What they do is within their culture, they are different. Within their culture, they treat a slave like a brother. A slave becomes a leader of the church in one of the largest cities in the ancient world. I mean, it's all the little actions that build up into something big, because at the end of the day, what we have to understand is there are no little actions. There are no unspiritual decisions. Every choice we make is a spiritual one. Every decision we make is an important one. Our faith is supposed to be reflected, not in spiritual warfare in unseen realms. Our faith is supposed to be reflected every single day with every single interaction we have with people we don't know and people we know exceedingly well. In the way that we go to work, in the way that we work, in the ethics we choose to convey, in the way that we see the world and say, I'm going to do what's right, or we don't. It's in what compromises we're fine with. And guys, this is not easy. Remember that slave talk we had earlier? I wrote the sermon on a laptop. It's not easy. And we're not always going to get it right. But Christianity, putting on the armor of God, it's not about yeah, demons exist, of course. Satan's real, of course. But you know what's also real is what I'm going to do this afternoon with my family. The sort of student I will be when I go to school. The sort of employee I will be when I go to work. The kind of relationship I'm going to have with my wife or husband or whatever. That's spiritual. It's a slave owner looking at his escaped slave and deciding, do I punish him because I can? Or do I forgive him? Because I could do that too. You see, what we think is normal isn't normal. Nothing's normal. No choice is unimportant. None of them. And I think it's so poetic that this song we sing that sounds so high and exalted and all this stuff. Here's another one, okay? There's a verse in that song that says, High King of Heaven. High King of Heaven. And we think, oh, we're exalting God. Nope. In the 6th century in Ireland, there were kings, and then there was a high king over the kings. All the guy is saying is, God is the king over the kings. That's all he's saying. It's insanely, wildly practical. We're just 1,500 years removed from it, so we think it's, oh, well, that's poetic. It's not poetic. We just don't understand. That was real life for him. We have to understand that for us, there are no small decisions. There are no relationships we're allowed to throw away. There's no people we're allowed to disregard. Everything we do counts. So we put on the full armor of God, knowing that our battle is not really about here, it's about much bigger things. But it's also played out here. Our faith is spiritual and heavenly, but it's played out in an arena that is physical and earthly. And so we need to take that very seriously. It was normal for them, this Onesimus Philemon situation. We're not going to be in that situation often, or maybe ever. But all the normal situations you find yourself in, those are the situations where you are called to stop listening to the culture around you, stop listening to people around you, and just follow Christ. And that may be very difficult, and it may take sacrifice, and it may take you laying down your rights that you have and saying, well, I'm not going to employ them all. But whatever it is for you, you've been called in every normal situation in your life to follow Christ. This morning, when our last week for our series called The Songs We Sing, Vol.2, there is no secret song this year, like there was last year. That's my favorite thing I've ever done, guys. I loved so much. What a dumb, such a great illustration. Just reminiscing about that. That was so good. I loved that so much. You guys are like, it's done. It's not done. Just like CDs. Anyway, so we're done this time. Next week is something totally different. But as we finish this series, talk about Be Thou My Vision. As we talk about, man, this is tough stuff. But it is, more than anything else, a conversation about how absolutely everything is important. Because our 9th lesson from the Songs We Sing, Volume 2 is this: everything is spiritual. In every moment, instance, and relationship, Christ leads and we follow. Everything is spiritual. In every moment, instance, and relationship, Christ leads and we follow. The musicians are coming forward. We're going to sing a song. We offer an invitation each and every week. If you want to get baptized, you should. Everybody in this room has heard that spiel. If you want to get baptized, let's talk. If you're already baptized, you want to join the church. The church is not a purpose. Blah, blah, blah. You've heard that before too. Got it. Great. I say the same thing every week. If you're confused, talk to me later, and I'll say, where have you been? Everyone in this room has heard that. Okay. So, at the end of the day, we are called as people to treat every day as sacred and holy and important and spiritual, because it is. As we stand,